It would be, of course, the greatest find of all if we uh, found the tomb of Jesus. I'll quickly make a reference to the two that are most visited today in Jerusalem and go ahead and point out that we have not found the tomb of Jesus that, to the point that we can be assured of it. Um, what we have found, thanks to biblical archaeology, is the bone box of a very important figure that was responsible for the death of Jesus of Nazareth. Uh, he's not the only one. There are many forces, many people responsible for the death of Jesus of Nazareth. But Caiphas is one of those that appears in the gospel narratives as being the high priest and therefore the top figure in the chain of command among the Jews that decided that Jesus must die, and then went to the Roman governor Pilate and asked that he be crucified. Caiphas's ossuary. An ossuary is a bone box, and I'll show you, and is the way in which, in the first century AD, for about 70, 80 years, the Jews buried their dead, and I'll make reference to that. We have found, by all accounts, the bone box, the remains of a figure that directly laid out a capital punishment order for Jesus in the weeks and months before, he was arrested and crucified, Caiphas, ossuary. It has been found. The Caiphas family tomb was accidentally discovered by workers, and this happens a lot in Jerusalem, who were constructing a road and a park just south of the old city of Jerusalem. Still to this day, when apartment buildings or new housing districts are built in Jerusalem, they very often stumble into, in their digging process, into first century or other layers of the long history of Jerusalem, which of course encompasses 3,000 years at least. Archaeologists on that occasion were hastily called to the scene when the diggers found the entrance to what clearly was a family tomb. When they examined the tomb, they found 12 bone boxes, boxes made out of terracotta that were made to store bones. They were limestone, that's the material out of which they were made, and there were 63 individual bone systems that were found in these 12 boxes because the first century people recycled, reused, used more than once bone boxes because tombs were expensive, bone boxes were as well, and so they had a habit of reusing bone boxes. There is one of the 12 that was very beautifully decorated, which of course says it was more expensive, probably of a more important person of the family, and in fact had even an inscription on it which read in Hebrew, Joseph, son of, or of the family of Caiphas. So that, of course, immediately drew the attention of biblical scholars. That, of course, was the full name of the high priest who arrested Jesus, which is documented not only in the Gospels, but also by secular historians like Josephus in his work called The Antiquities. Inside were found, thanks to DNA analysis, etc., modern day techniques, the remains of a 60-year-old male, which makes it just about certain that it is the Caiphas of the New Testament. If we said 99%, 98% certain, that would be about right. It was a remarkable discovery, recent, and in the last 30 years, and it provided us with physical remains of an individual directly connected with Jesus of Nazareth, named often in the New Testament narratives. Josephus is the non-Bible source that talks about Caiphas. He's a first century Jewish historian hired by the Romans, an aristocratic Jew, highly educated, that was conscripted by the Romans to write a history of the Jews for him. And his works contain information about Caiphas outside of the Bible, about his tenure as high priesthood, along with reports of other high priests, and also the records of Josephus helped to establish a coherent description of the responsibilities of the office of high priest in that time. He became high priest during a very turbulent period under the Romans. He was deposed. We know he lost his job by the order of a Roman proconsul by the name of Vitellius. And again, according to Josephus, Caiphas was appointed in the year 18 by the Roman prefect who preceded a name that you should recognize, Pontius Pilate. And his name was Valerius Gratus. A reading from the biblical text, it says this: In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip, tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiphas, the word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. So here's the reference to Caiphas, and it mentions Annas as well. So a quick reference to a summary sheet of Caiphas in the Gospels, which is recorded also in Matthew 26, Luke 3, and John 18. Caiphas was high priest for 18 years, in the years between 18 and 36. He married the daughter of Annas, so Annas was his father-in-law, who was head of a very powerful high priestly clan of the Sadducees. Caiphas was the leader of the conspiracy to crucify Jesus. He's the one that decided that one had to die, and Jesus was it, to preserve the role that the Sadducees and the Jews had with Roman authorities. Jesus had to die. He could not be left alive. It is he that said, John 11, it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. This is what Caiphas said, as recorded by John, to his own Sanhedrin, his own the high court, you could say, of the Jews at that time. Jesus was taken, as recorded in the Gospels, into Caiphas' house. He was detained there overnight before he was taken to Pilate and then crucified. The guards in Caiphas' house mocked him and beat him. See the record in Luke 22. In the morning, he was interrogated, Jesus was, and further beaten. Caiphas is the one that asks him, "Are you the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus replied to him, "I am." Caiphas then handed Jesus over to Pilate to be tried. So about 30 years ago, evidence of the tomb was found. Here is the church of Peter and Gallicanto, as it's called, and the many churches built Catholic in Jerusalem over the centuries. Near this particular Catholic church was found the tomb, the family tomb, and it looked kind of like a four-fingered structure built into the rock, and these you can see these fingers are excavated areas where they would lay the body wrapped in linen of a family member who would be left there for about a year to decay, to decompose, so that when they came back about a year later, they would find only the bones, as the fleshy parts had decayed over that year time. And then they would collect the bones from the body, and then they would put them in bone boxes. So please see at the bottom part, on the right, you can see bone repository and bone boxes. And now we'll show you the bone box of Caiphas, the high priest that commissioned Jesus to die, and turned him over to Pilate, and used the mob to get Jesus put on a cross, because only the Romans could do public crucifixions. Here is the beautifully decorated Caiphas ossuary, or bone box, in which the remains of Caiphas were found. And this is a remarkable discovery of something that directly relates to the story of Jesus of Nazareth in the New Testament. One other reading from John chapter 18. The band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. They led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiphas, who was the high priest that year. It was Caiphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. Then those who had seized Jesus, we have now moved to the Gospel of Matthew 26, led him to Caiphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. And Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last two came forward and said, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days. And the high priest stood up and said, Have you no answer to make? And what is it that these men testify against you? But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, You have said so. But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his robes and said, He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? And they answered, He deserves death. Then they spit in his face, struck him, and some slapped him, saying, Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you? Caiphas is mentioned not just in the Gospels, also in the other history book of the New Testament, the book of Acts. Following Jesus' crucifixion, Caiphas is described as continuing to persecute followers of Christ after the birth of the early church, and the movement of the way of Jesus of Nazareth kept multiplying within Jerusalem. He tried to stop it. He brought the apostles before the religious leaders, and he said to them, We gave you strict orders not to teach in his name being Jesus, of course. Yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood. And again here, Caiphas is trying to insinuate that he is not responsible for the death of Jesus. The answer of Peter is echoes in time. Peter simply said, Look, we must obey God rather than men. You're going against God's will, so we're going to have to ignore your instruction. One other find that's very interesting is in the ossuary, or in the family tomb of Caiphas, were found some nails, example of first century Roman nails. Here is in a white glove of one of the archaeologists, example of Roman nails. Here is a detail of it. If you're thinking of what kind of nails were used, they were large, expensive at the time, and when they were fully in their form, would have looked something like this. And because they were large and expensive, they were reused for the most, if possible. Of course, that is one of the issues. We have found one skeleton with a Roman nail through the ankle. So we have found one skeleton of a crucified man from the 1st century AD. It was found in 1968. We know who the man was. It was found in a cave in Jerusalem. His name was Yehohanan, and he was a 1st century temple worker. He ran afoul of Roman authorities. Romans were the only ones that were crucified, but the bones give clear evidence of 1st century AD Roman crucifixion. Here is the remains of the ankle bone with the Roman nail that was not reused because it was, in a sense, stuck in the bone. But this does allow me to make a quick reference to crucifixion, method of capital punishment highly used by Romans. It is the slowest way to die. Sometimes men were left on a cross for a week and kept from dying by keeping them hydrated up on the cross. Here is an artistic image of one way in which crucifixion was done, but there are at least 4 formats of crosses that were used in the 1st century AD that we know from archaeology and secular history. What you see as the main image here would use 4 nails, 2 for the hands and 2 for the feet. This is one of the types of crosses that were used in the 1st century AD. But see to the left, please, other types of crosses, the X, the straight, what I might call an I, and then what looks like a T. Those are the other 3 types of crosses that were used by Romans in the 1st century AD to exercise capital punishment by way of crucifixion. The most likely way that was used with Jesus is the one that you see on the right, but however, with one exception we might make, that is, they might have conserved with only using 3 nails instead of 2 by putting the ankles together on the front of the cross and using 1 nail to go through both ankles at the same time, kind of sideways. This concludes a quick look at the Caiphas Ossuary as evidence of the details of the biblical story connected directly with the crucifixion of Jesus.